The movie opens in a dim mansion in the 1930s. A butler visits a locked room where Emmeline is confined, urging her to eat as she must be weak. Emmeline refuses, saying she can't keep going on, and despite the butler's pleas, she attacks him and escapes. As she searches for a way out, she finds piano strings, wraps one around her neck, and while everyone searches for her, hangs herself, saying, "It all ends here with me." The story then shifts to present-day New York City, where Evie, working as a caterer for a company event called Unlock Your Past, jokes with her friend Grace about flirty customers. Grace gives Evie a gift from the company, which specializes in finding long-lost relatives through DNA. At home, feeling lonely, Evie listens to a voicemail from her mother from a year before she passed. Curiosity piqued, she decides to send in her DNA sample to uncover new family connections. The next day, Evie visits her friend Grace and checks her email, discovering a message from the DNA company revealing she has a second cousin named Oliver in London. Oliver mentions that he'll be in New York for business and suggests they meet. Grace warns Evie about meeting an online stranger, but Evie insists it'll be nice to connect with family. When they meet, Oliver shares stories about their family, explaining how Evie's great-grandmother had a scandalous affair with a black footman in 1925. He left with their baby, and the family lost contact. Now, Oliver says, the family would love to welcome her and invites her to an upcoming wedding in England. Though hesitant due to costs, Evie agrees when Oliver says it'll be covered. Upon arriving in England, Evie promises Grace to stay in touch and share her location for safety. Oliver greets her at the airport, and they drive to the family estate, New Carfax Abbey, where wedding preparations are underway. As she tries to take a picture of the car's license plate to send to Grace, Evie accidentally bumps into a caterer, breaking several glasses. Mr. Field, the head butler, sternly tells them to clean up, but Walter DeVille, the mansion's owner, steps in, calming the situation and welcoming Evie warmly. After Oliver introduces Walter formally, Walter charmingly flirts with Evie before leaving her to settle in. Mr. Field escorts her to her room, advising that she's free to explore, except for the library, which is under renovation. In her room, Evie meets Mrs. Swift, her lady's maid, and notices the barred windows. Curious, Evie asks Mrs. Swift about them, and Mrs. Swift explains they're to protect against shrikes, aggressive carnivorous birds prevalent this time of year. Evie also spots a portrait of a woman and learns from Mrs. Swift that she was a former lady of the house who recently passed away. Evie calls Grace and updates her about the day. While they're talking, Walter knocks on her door to apologize for the butler and says he's happy she accepted the invitation, wanting to get to know her better. Grace listens in and jokes about Walter possibly being a good boyfriend. The next day, Evie goes jogging and hears wailing coming from a small building near the mansion. Looking out her window, she sees Emmeline from the painting. That night, she has nightmares about Emmeline and wakes up scared, hearing whispers calling her name. Later, at 3 a.m., Evie walks through the house and sees Mr. Field giving orders to the maids. She feels a presence behind her, but when she turns, there's no one. Mrs. Swift suddenly appears and warns her to stay in her room because the darkness is dangerous. In the library, a maid cleaning hears strange sounds, and a phonograph turns on by itself, playing eerie music. As she looks around, she's attacked. The next day, Evie attends the family meeting where she meets distant relatives. Meanwhile, Mr. Field sends 2 maids to the wine cellar, and one of them is attacked, with her neck snapped by an unseen force. Evie returns to her room to find Walter has left her a dress for another evening event. She's surprised when everyone claps as she enters the meeting. She meets the bridesmaids, Lucy and Victoria, who tell her family has long been connected to the DeVilles, and Victoria mentions that Evie is lucky to have been pulled into their world. Evie ignores Victoria's provocation and goes for another glass of champagne. Lucy then approaches her, becoming friendlier. When Walter arrives, he invites Evie to dance the first piece, and soon the other guests join in. Afterward, Walter suggests they go to a quieter, more secluded area of the mansion to talk. As they walk, Evie asks about the small building near the house, and Walter explains it's an ancient ice store. He then takes her to a room with a ceramic figure-making machine, and they bond over their family histories. Walter asks if Evie would like to wake up every day to enjoy the beauty around her, and they share a kiss, while Victoria watches from outside, clearly jealous. At midnight, the party ends, and Walter dismisses the guests, warning Victoria not to complain about Evie. That night, Evie is woken by strange noises in her room. When she turns on the light, she sees a shadowy figure on her bed's canopy, which causes her to panic. She hides under the bed, but a hand suddenly grabs her feet. It's Walter, who reassures her and tells her to calm down. He searches the room, but they find no one. Evie, still shaken, starts crying, and Walter comforts her, offering to stay the night. Evie agrees, and as he lies beside her, Walter opens up about his loneliness, despite his wealth. Evie falls asleep before he finishes speaking. The next day, Lucy and Victoria come to Evie's room to remind her about the spa day. She's also worried because she hasn't written to her friend Grace in a while. At the spa, Evie chats with other women and expresses her excitement about meeting the bride and groom. Later, Victoria walks into the pool area and provokes Evie, asking if Walter has told her anything about their relationship. Evie, feeling frustrated, asks Victoria what her problem is. Evie becomes furious when Victoria sucks her finger after it gets cut during the spa session, leading her to storm out. As she walks back to her room, she is drawn to the locked library and decides to enter. After finding the key, she sneaks inside and searches the desk, knocking things over. She discovers papers detailing her social media profile and family connection, confirming that Walter had been researching her. Shocked and feeling betrayed, she begins packing to leave the mansion. Walter enters, explaining that he wanted to get to know her beyond just her online profile, and assures her that he was just trying to protect himself. After some tension, Evie agrees to stay, albeit reluctantly. Later, during a lavish dinner, Walter makes a shocking announcement. He proposes marriage to Evie in front of the gathered families. At first, she thinks it's a joke, but the situation quickly turns sinister when Walter ignores her protests and continues with the celebration. Suddenly, Mr. Field kills a maid and collects her blood in a bowl. Walter raises the bowl in a toast, thanking the guests, who are all members of the three powerful families, for their prosperity and security due to these dark rituals. It becomes clear to Evie that she is entangled in something much more dangerous than she ever imagined. Evie watches as Mr. Field hands out cups of blood to the bridesmaids, her shock growing with each passing moment. Walter makes a toast to their eternal bond, but when Evie tries to leave, he reveals his vampire fangs and orders the bridesmaids to prepare her for the next day. Evie is taken to a dark room, where Victoria and Lucy explain that she is to become Walter's third wife. Victoria admits to being the one who frightened Evie the previous night. The two force Evie into a coffin, and she spends a horrific night trapped inside. The next day, Mrs. Swift, who had been a friend of Evie's great-grandmother, helps her escape, revealing that she must kill any vampire she encounters. Evie flees the mansion and discovers the bodies of the murdered maids in a small building nearby. As she tries to hide from Mr. Field, she escapes to a nearby town where an elderly couple, who had worked at the mansion, helps her and reveals the truth about her family's dark history. The old man insists that Evie drink the tea, but she knows better and throws it in his face. She attempts to escape, but the old woman knocks her unconscious with a figurine. When Evie wakes up, she finds herself back in the mansion, with Walter by her side. He admires her bravery and explains that he is a Nosferatu, offering her wealth, power, and eternal life. Evie spits in his face, disgusted. Later, she sees Walter feeding on a maid and faints. The next thing she knows, she's walking down the aisle for their wedding. During the ritual, Evie takes more blood from Walter than intended, weakening him. As he grows weaker, she uses the distraction to set the mansion on fire, stabbing him with a candle holder and freeing the maid. Evie escapes, but Victoria catches up to her, and they fight. Evie insists Walter is dead, but Victoria reveals that if she truly killed him, she'd be dead too. Lucy arrives to help Evie, and the two fight Victoria together. In a final struggle, Lucy pushes Victoria onto a spear, but Lucy is also impaled. Both women die. Evie wakes up to find Lucy and Victoria's bodies disintegrating. Mr. Field appears, trying to kill Evie with a spear, but she manages to break it and stab him in the chest. As she searches for Walter, he finds her first and tries to choke her, claiming he was saving her from a miserable existence. Evie retorts that she'd rather die than live in his world, and in a final confrontation, she cuts off his arm with a wire and kicks him into the fire. As Walter burns, Evie loses her powers, watching him die. With the mansion consumed by flames, Evie leaves. 2 weeks later, Oliver, who had escaped, is in his office trying to cover up his tracks. Evie, now with Grace by her side, confronts him. The movie ends with Evie and Grace entering Oliver's office, ready for revenge. Thanks for watching.